when they say I wanna be the best, I wanna play on high stakes, do you know what that means?
Yeah, you have a lot of experience coaching players. Maybe also to give like some pointers to some of the listeners. What do you think are like very common mistakes and leaks that players have, like that you encounter that kind of stops them from reaching higher levels of success?
Yeah, I feel it's always the same, but always different. Like the number one thing, we had really big struggles the first 9 months, I would say. And you mentioned it before, is this when you expect something that's you didn't even realize you expect because you thought it's so clear.
Mm.
And I think that shows like when you have an understanding of, let's say, we have an understanding of playing high stakes. And then we reverse that into, okay, Rene, you have an understanding of playing high stakes. I have an understanding of playing high stakes. And then we describe a person we believe belongs onto high stakes, and how does that person work, or what's his routine, what are his characteristics, and then you compare to someone who's playing mid stakes, and you're like, what is that person doing? And then when they say I wanna be the best, I wanna play on high stakes, then you're assuming that they have that understanding too. Because that's what I assumed, is like, okay, do you know what that means? Do you know what it means to be one of the best? Do you know what it means, how to work, how much time, like how much professionalism you have to show, how effective you have to work, um, and what you have to bring to the table. And I think that's where the first discrepancy starts, is expectation and expectation management. It's a very loose sentence to throw around to, I want to be great, I want to be the best, I want to play high stakes. It's a very loose sentence. But when you look at actions, and when you look at what people are actually doing, I would say that is the biggest struggle, is actions don't match the words.
So they basically, you confront them with this.
I confront them with this often.
What is then a common response that you get? What's like the first level of resistance sentence that they throw at you afterwards?
There's not really resistance. There's some resistance, but there's not really resistance. I think because they're probably, they take what I say pretty serious. So I think that is a very good starting point. But it's like, I think a really big point is, let's say you stand there, right? You look at something, and I stand on the other side, or maybe even I stand on top and I see a bit more. And now the thing in the middle, let's say, is working in a group or having a group of people to work with or exchange. And now that person is looking at that idea, that concept, and is like evaluating this idea, is like, yeah, working in a group is, I have a few buddies. If I grind Sunday, I post a hand in there, maybe they give some response, there's some value, so they evaluate this thing from this perspective. I evaluate it from this perspective and saying, okay, if you work in a group and you're 8 people and 8 people prepare content, and every person puts in 3 hours into 30 minutes of content, you have 4 hours of content, you share that content within 3 hours of work, you have you get 3 hours and 30 minutes of other content of people who have put their time in there. So 3 hours of input and higher density of content. Now suddenly, if you do this as a routine, if I put in just this amount of time, if I take this very seriously, I can swap with those guys, I can study with those guys, I can drill with those guys, I can learn with them, I can travel with them. Live poker is going to be, so basically I see this whole package of like, a group is probably one of the most meaningful and most valuable things you can have in poker, if you find people who are just willing to commit and can produce high quality output. And they look at it and we're like, a group is like, it's nice to have some people to chat with, but not really. So you already have such a big clash in the understanding of what the value is. So they're not willing to. Nobody is like, why should I proactively spend 4 hours to prepare something because it's not clear to you that everyone's doing that, right? It's not this clear thing where like, yeah, if I do that, because it's not a clear reaction. You might do it, nobody else does something. You're like, why did I do that? So
And it's also, I guess, their definition, right? You say, do you work with other players? They say yes. But work with other players, your definition of work with other players, you just described, whereas their work with other players is, yeah, I shared a hand history on Sunday, you know, after I played this tournament.
yeah, or
So
you
maybe
know, a loose review, or like, and they work with players that are, you know, much worse than them, and there's not really a strong ethic, and it's like very loose, and you just hang out after grind, and like, you know, kind of this, like a social, it's more a social event, right? It's more like a social thing, which is also totally fine, and I think those things are important too. But I think in terms of, again, if you're in this mode of, hey, I want to be one of the best, you just you got to increase the intensity of output to a degree where you progress significantly faster than other people in your competition group. And I think we are at a point now, and that's why I'm very excited, because if I open Discord, you know, if I compare now it feels more like breathing to them, where there's like, you know, there's like even this week, you know, there's just constantly stuff today now, and like 1 hour there's a session, like everyone's joining, like people are chatting all the time, like in different time zones. Someone does a study session at 2 a.m, someone else is joining. It's just like, it just feels like vibrant, and something's happening all the time. And when you have that, then it's at that point, it's like you wouldn't even know, you would never want to go back. So
I mean, it's also, I think it's a good actually pointer for people listening to this pod. I'm sure there's many people that's maybe listened to all our episodes, and they probably like, maybe I have checked this. Yeah, I do that. But what does it actually mean? They were like, yeah, well, I work with people. Yeah, I do this, I do that. But it's the quality with which you do it that's going to determine the outcome. I think another very common thing that I hear when you say, oh, well, you want to get to high stakes, then you have to do this, this, and this. And then they say, yeah, but that's not necessary at my stakes, you know, because I'm playing low stakes or mid stakes. But like,
yeah.
but if you're not doing it now, you will also not do it later. And the fact that you're not doing it now means that you're not getting to the high stakes, right? So I think it's always a good reflection that, let's say, for example, someone listening is playing like lower stakes or mid stakes. How would you structure your week, or how would you prepare for a session if tomorrow you would have to play against Fedor, for example? And they might say like, oh, wow, no, yeah, if I play against Fedor tomorrow, you know, then I might skip that hamburger tonight. You know, I might eat something healthy, or I might go to the gym, you know, because I want to feel sharp.
Yeah.
Well, approach tomorrow like you would play against Fedor. Then that would, I think, be my advice. You did? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because you asked around, I mentioned one big thing I see in people struggling, or is this mismatch of actions and expectations. And I would say that's probably the major point, because generally I would say people want to be successful for a variety of different reasons. But in poker, I believe you need to, as intrinsically as possible, just want it more than the majority of things in your life. Otherwise, I would say it's almost impossible. Like, I always make this example. I think it is very, very, very important that you don't force this. Because I've also worked with players who have lots of interest, for example. They have a variety of different hobbies. And poker is one of those, you know, like, let's say out of the 5 hobbies that they're very, you know, they love biking, they love skydiving, they do this regular, you know, like, even like, let's say they travel to do this, and like, and then they love poker as well. But you know, and you also have a girlfriend, and you have a strong social circle, and like lots of friends outside. You went to uni, and you know, like, your family's in Germany, you also love to visit your family, and then I see poker more as a lifestyle facilitator. And that, for me, I think there's always something negative connected with this, because there's always this element, you know, it's just kind of like, it's not the whole deal, like, you don't try to make. I think that is such a great thing to use poker for. Like, I think poker is such a great thing to do 30 hours a week, or like 25 hours a week. I think it's a great thing. Now, you can make 100K a year, no problem. You will never play Tritons, probably, and you will probably never play high stakes, and you probably never will make 250K. But for 5 years, it's a great thing to do, especially if you like it. You can travel to a few places. It can be mentally very challenging. You can develop in certain things, and it just has to be clear you got to move on at some point. And also it's got to be clear it's just never the full-on thing. But I think that is a very important realization that a lot of players struggle with, because it's very hard to accept that with yourself. It's like, hey, this is kind of my lifestyle profession.
Then they kind of never feel satisfied, I guess, because then they do spend the things and their hobbies, but then they maybe feel guilty. But I should try to become this great poker player. And if they would then kill all their hobbies and focus only on poker, they also feel miserable. So it's very important, I think, what you're pointing out is that you kind of know what's important to you and where does poker fit in. So is indeed poker just a facilitator for the other things that is important to you, then that's great. But it's a problem when you do the other things, so you kind of feel guilty that you should spend time on poker. And unfortunately, I mean, the reality of poker is you're competing as other guys, and there's someone there, spending 24/7 on poker. It's very likely that he is going to outperform you. Actually, another point that I wanted to add, like the way you described that you approach sessions, right? Some players might listen, or I guess the majority might listen, but like, oh, wow, but that's not normal. And they would look around, well, you don't do that. You don't do that. Well, if you do the thing, that's normal, quote, quote, you will get the results that normal, quote, quote, aka the results of the majority. And the majority is not a high stakes poker player, right? So maybe, doing things different is probably a good idea if you want to have different results than the majority.
Yes, but then also it's not that hard. I always try to say that, because I understand, like, you have to put a lot of effort into lining yourself up, let's say it like this, like to just get in a good routine. But then the actual doing, I think, is surprisingly easy.
It is when it becomes normal, right? Because you don't think differently.
Yeah, but also just the tasks at hand, I think, are not as challenging as in other areas. For example, I think it is often rather rewarding tasks, pretty action-based or pretty outcome-based, where something you learn almost immediately helps you something for what you're doing. It's very practical. Like, I think people often forget that it's just actually a very, very nice way to learn and practice something. It's like, I would say if you work, let's say 15 hours on your game or 20 hours on your game a week, you're outperforming the absolute vast majority. And if you put in those, rather smart, with like a high drive to improve the processes and improve your learning process and find good routines for yourself, with a high level of practical drilling, rather fit to practical outcomes in your actual gameplay, you'll make great strides of progress. And it's not an absurd amount of time, effort. But I think to get to that point, oftentimes people struggle a lot. So yeah, you need the right setting.